decent. How well that goes. Welcome to the exciting world of where I go on and on and on about a book and sources. On replacing Darwin, we're going through his cute little charts. He's got so many cute little charts. Last week we did the. Now we get to have mice and rats. Oh, whoop! I keep on forgetting to eliminate my stop share of the vital people who are the patrons that help me get by every month so that I can continue to blather on in the way that I do and write books and do all things that contribute to the world. Okay, try again. Put up our little chart here. There we go. You know, they all look identical. You know, I mean, it's a straight line from the flood. And some of them are occurring a little bit earlier, post-flood period, and some of them are occurring later. All he's doing is taking the systematic and scrunching it into that little time frame. But of course, there may be data involved in there. So although here, unlike his previous one, oh, hi, Slade, how you doing? All those examples didn't really have anything in his reference bibliography that related to them. He did do a little bit closer to not doing something with the mice because he actually had discussed quite a few papers that related to mouse genetics, mutation rates, but nothing really systematic, all of that. So, of course, I'll have that for you. We've got a nice little 2004 paper, which is Deep Dive by Steppen on the whole genetic straightforwards of the mice going back 25 million years, a little bit earlier into 1,300. And then specifically on the mice as they're going in the along the Arctic Ocean and spreading across the Bering Bridge. That's like in the last million years. That's a little paper here, and we'll be putting the links up to all of that little fun and games. The part relates to a nice summary piece by John Elder from 2021, which will have a bunch of different links into it to the various technical paper tribes, which is on conspiracies lack critical thinking skills. This one's kind of a nice little review piece. It relates to the larger issue of how do people believe things that aren't true? To what extent does this kind of mindset translate into other areas? And this is me. Oh, yes, yeah. Lamont. I saw as much as I could of your things on frogs with nest leg, which was absolutely entrancing. Always a fascinating thing. Well, the amphibians in general are a huge blob, and they show up in the Ark Encounter in rocks. Although, because so many of the groups are very specialized remnant bunch, there's an awful lot of them, an awful lot of the families that have only a single living specimen species. And that, of course, is kind of curious, where effectively the creationist is forced into extincting the family level at that point, precisely because we don't have a record for a lot of these amphib groups. Anyway, about the conspiracy bit, it connects to the cognitive architecture of some religious thinkers, not all, but some, and political conservatism. And you find this connecting up with the Trump people, and you have it dealing with other things in relation to we didn't land on the moon and all these other goods. So although there is a temptation to there's like a malfunction in the conspiracy thinkers causes them to do things, it's a much bigger suite of cognitive systems that can contribute to this. And it also depends on what your background is, just as we know on psychopathic personalities that there's a role plays in the thing, but just because you have a little shriveled amygdala that doesn't have good connections doesn't mean that you're going to turn into a psychopath if environment that helps compensate, because the brain is a fascinating pile of meat that does amazing amazing things and restructures itself within certain limits. So those papers are going to be quite fun on there. Oh, she's going Slade's getting the gear to do science. Oh, yes. Well, absolutely. Give us a head up on that when you start doing stuff. If it's going to be like on YouTube or whatever, it's always like it's never too young to the science bug. And I'll do the same. It's never too young to get the history bug. If you look at this stuff behind me, the seas and movies and books and all the rest, anybody that positively mired in history, that quite a lot of the whole point of Dunk is the discussion of how creation dealt with the history of animal transition data and the history of the paleontology and the history of how creationists have screwed all of this up over time. It's all true. So there we go. So the principles that come in there on analytical skills are the same kind of ones that I kind of sit back on a historical background. I've mentioned this occasionally in the previous shows and might as well make a diatribe about it again, is the fact that the historian already has to deal with how you measure sources. Is a source reliable? You're dealing with the human history part, which is where I came from, 19th century American history, antebellum, Civil War, Reconstruction in particular, but I was also fascinated in the Hellenistic Roman world and all that, so I had a lot of different bits. And then I was teaching for a Professor Wong from the old Hong Kong, who was Chinese history, and so that put me in the whole Asian. All of that history, which is a fancy little word that everyone should know, historiography. I hope I get this spelled right on this stupid historiography. Historiography. I think I'm getting it right there. Something like that. I got too many R's in there. Laptops are a nuppy thing. I'm not terribly almost got that spelled right. We'll live with it. That it's the history, and anybody that's in the historical realm knows that our perceptions of things and the kind of modalities is what is the fashionable view of things. Is the Roman Empire falling apart because developed, which was Gibbon's approach back in the 18th century, and others, and the role of political thinking when you Marxist thinking starting to come in the century, and they're looking at things in terms of class struggle and all this sort. So if you look at Spartacus, you're seeing left-wing view of the Roman Empire written by Dalton Trumbo, who was a blacklisted communist at the time, just coming out of that. And fast, it was a very left-wing novel, and so you get a particular perspective on things. I Claudius, if you've ever seen I Claudius and all of that, that's very much Britain disillusioned from World War I, viewing aristocracy as this deadened thing that's bringing everybody down, and so their perception of the homicidal nutballs and that were running around in the Julio-Claudian period from this on through to Nero. So historiography deals with all of that. Well, more ones, that's just easy because they're, yes, your realities and viewpoints, individual scientists, and they may have their particular model that they're dealing with. The Baja BC in geology today, about how much of little chunks of stuff down in Mexico ended up pulled up to British Columbia, and how that relates to dating and manipulating and working out things into the magnetic orientation of rocks and what's going on as the land masses rotate or not. All of that's an immensely complicated, fascinating field. The rock data themselves, the physical data points, aren't themselves potential liars. They're just the data see. Whereas human beings, we historians have to deal with bullshitters, propagandist kings like Ramesses putting crap up on the walls of the temples and all of that. He is defeating the question, all of that. Caesar writing self-serving memoirs about his invasion of conquest and so forth. That will have elements that are still valuable historically, but you're always looking as potentially propaganda as to what the public image wants to deal with. And so then you go, the archaeologist is coming in saying, well, let's look at the facts as to what body and who they are and how many men and how many women and how old they are and what they're buried with and what the Romans are doing and so forth and so on. And sure, if we have records of that. So that's the story in this game, has to play things that already come into play if you're just dealing with the sciences. So easy peasy to talk about paleontology, here to try to work out what the hell was the internal politics of the early Roman Empire and how much of it's propaganda by written later on and all that sort of stuff. So that idea that there's one sound method, one to rule them all, is the big thing that I play up here. That I don't see any difference in the methodology that you figure out what was going on in the past and whether or not ripped off his nephews, the princes in the or any of those historical things, and how you deal with medical journals relating to controversies in scientific matters, which are based on data, also relate to which information they're presenting and which one's not. So it's all the same historiographic element. If you find a particular scientist that plays fast and loose with a lot of the material and has a bad track record for predictivity, say an Alan Fiducia in Evolution issues, then that's a bearing point. And then some people go right off the completely. There are occasional scientists, who just turn Looney Tunes on you, and they start blue crap, often in their old age. Some get started kind of early. There's the pterosaur heresies that this guy just has weird ideology, and he had some early credibility in publications early on, but he's just gone off the deep end in terms of how he comes up with weird ideas about critters that have just Darren Nash will make some comments and I'm just saying, here's what the guy's up to, same kind of element. And some of these same processes you're seeing in other ideological scientists who will be in the creationism movement. You find exactly the same dynamic going on in climate science, where you have the renegade climate scientist who doesn't change, and they have their little websites and they have their books and lecture tours appearing on shows sponsored by the Heartland Institute, and now you're back into the political dynamics of things. Well, all of that is exactly the same kind of method that you would do for looking at political things, for looking whether or not you should buy a refrigerator or not. Are you just going to assume advertisement is correct? You find out how reliable it is. You read outside and all that. Same methodology. So the idea of a single unified method, there's no reason to think that shouldn't be inculcated in kids quite early on, which is skepticism and to ask, well, why is that true? Well, you don't need to take my authority on it. You can look into things as well. And if you have the kind that says, well, isn't that somebody else's authority? Kinda, yeah. But there's ways of measuring things for ability to ground you. And the rules are very straightforward. If somebody makes a claim and puts sources for it, and you look up the source and it doesn't say what they say it does, bingo, they're in trouble. If it says what they say it does, but it's really selected because they've taken the quote out of context, and this happens in creationism and in quite a lot of other political vast on all sides. It's not just the Trumpistas that do that. Nick something out of context to make it appear to be a case, and that's not good practice. And in the scientific realm, where ultimately there's a data field beyond that, it's a very bad practice if what you're doing is misreplication of the work. And you find all the time in people get their head straight on the sciences part. Then, of course, if it's even worse that the site of sources doesn't even exist, or it's simply they're citing in-house material, this incestuous stuff where the only time they're going to external sources if occasionally they can find a snippet that, if taken out of context, will look like it matches the dog. Pretty much all the time, the rest of it is themselves citing their groups. Look at the Discovery Institute, and where you've only got like a dozen people that are doing all of their apologetics, and it's just this churny chain of material. You can find that to plan when Jackson and I eventually the book Was He Thinking connects up to what we're talking about. Climate science will be in that realm. We'll be dealing with a kind of taxonomy of the two variables involved, which is how stupid it is. In other words, how really not true. And so there's a gradation where you have flat Earth up at the top is like, no. And then how significant is it in that, how much does it affect society? And in that respect, flat Earth is relatively trivial because there aren't too many flat earthers. So something like anti-vaxxer mythology, that is way more mass during the pandemic, because you had all of these people who nonsense and still do in very, and this is embroiled into that political. So when you notice that certain political groups tend to certain things, whereas if you go to that group, you can find people who are liberal or conservative holding the view, but the ones holding the contrarian view are all one politication, and very, very, very narrow at that. That starts raising alarm bells. And if you look at the demographics of any group that is highly ideological, they're talking litmus tests on that. The one that I've been kind of following recently is the Epoch Times, which you may see on YouTube ads for the Epoch Times. Is just smarmily good-looking guys talking about, if you'd like to see the truth and that sort of thing, come to our website and all that. And there would be no indication whatsoever that this is a hyper-conservative group founded by the Falun religious cult over in China, and them embroiled with the PRC, which is state oppressive group. So it's not like the Chinese are nice because Falun Gong is weird, but at any rate, extremely politically conservative, and they have been abashed supporters of Donald Trump, and also definite prevention of anti-vax, anti-COVID misinformation study. There's this one fellow, Mercola, who posts on there quite relentlessly, and others network on there. But it has all the appearance of a newsy kind of thing, and will look subject matter in that very similar to Fox News in terms of content and who they quote and otherwise. So it's a matter that when you're dealing with an ideologue, there are two sides to an issue. Their side one and everybody else who's wrong. And they will decide that by only citing people that agree with them, and also not really going enough detail. Even if you wanted to try to fact check stuff, it's hilarious that on a typical post from them, 90% of it will be just more Epoch Times posts. So it's incessant in the same way that the Discovery Institute is. Bells and whistles. So anyway, that's some of the little guide. Now, there you can find that sort of thing over in other political persuasions. I bumped into some full-out Stalinist Marxists a few months ago, who were just defending the bejabbers out of Stalin and the defamation about there being this famine in Ukraine during the 19th century. And they extol a video that is by a Stalinist defender who, upon a small group of people who claim that's operating in the communist network and things, and stuff that some of which came out back in the 1980s, even the 1970s, some of the older material. And you see exactly kinds of data selection. When you bump into external sources, they're extremely selective to deal with all of that. And so the same method, one bad method to rule them all, and one good method to rule things that are reasonable. So you have to be clear about. Always be suspicious of people that won't tell you what they think. Have I been shy about telling you what I think? No. And if people ask me a question, and they may not like the answer to it, but there it is. Whereas you find this with creationists, and you find it with a lot of political ideologues that don't think about things they don't want to think about, and they often want to hide the ball as to what their viewpoint. They're not willing to just jump out. Would be just really bold about saying stuff, but then when you start probing about questions about, well, based on what? Did you fact check this? Does it occur to you to fact check this stuff? Would you know how to do the fact checking thing? Well, now we're back to that fundamental source methods again. Relying on like left-wing media and the received media. No, remember my little rule about you can look at their apologetics. If they are citing external sources and they don't say it's supposed to say, then measurement that they're incompetent. And now you don't have to depend on wing or external media. It's just like the reason why Elling has his head up their ass is not of the veracity or lack of it of the science sources he's doing. It's that I can detect directly poor science methods in the material that he directly presents. Am I not supposed to notice? All right. So that you want to ground things in some external source and internal methods approach to where you can detect whether or not they are playing fair with their facts or not. Always be very suspicious of people that are relying on really old stuff. That's one factor. Or highly incestuous material that's only being presented in work and all that. So it's stuff in a part, it got to read more widely, find things are. Never depend on a single source for anything. And in the few times when I've had my head up their ass, my blunders in terms of a viewpoint, it's because I relied on too few of sources. You're looking at a little bit that look good, university, very kind, but it turns out the person had an axe to grind and so on. That can happen. To correct requires sound method. So there we are. We got a pretty good show. About a half an hour into the thing. I'll be putting links up, of course, to the various papers involved and deal with all of that. I'm now literally on the last 2 pages, second volume, the sequel to the Paralogs of Phileas Fogg. It's kind of dominating my thinking at the moment to get that out of the way, so that then I can get to bed, get that in the mix, and then gear shift my brain over to I can resume the big information processing for volume. The rocks were there. There's a big pile of acts and facts, back issues that I still got to burrow through. Material sorted up properly. Almost all of the main core material of the doing. The one big slosh flood mythology material, that's pretty well complete. And then the next one that I'll be diving into is the cosmology chapter, and I have all of that material laid out, prepared to go on. So there's a lot, and of course the appendix that I basically, since the fact that we'll be doing that new appendix on the Ark Encounter kinds list, because no one's done real scale analysis of it. It hasn't been accessible to where you wouldn't even know exactly all the names on it, and there's enough oddities about how structured and why they're picking the things they are and why they're organizing them the way they do, that it deserves to have a real discussion. There we go on that. It looks like the next week, the weather here is going to be not as broiling hot. Everything else is frying all over the place. 112 degrees in Redding, California. That's up in the mountains. That's pine tree country. 112 degrees. And Salt Lake City is way over 100. Lake, that's humid as all get out during the summer as it is, and to have them over 100 degrees, that must be absolutely stifling there. So muddling around 85 or so, and maybe might be flirting with the 90s on a couple days, means that not too bad in this situation. So everybody stay safe and cool. Watch out for Omicron and monkeypox and all the other stuff. Watch the world unfold, and hopefully we can see this November and on to 2024 that they can finally get the stupid Artemis rocket off and its little probe around to the moon. It's still a full-way rocket system, which is not cost effective in my think, but to get something to the moon, yeah, at the moment the squeaky things that is being done commercially by Tesla, Elon Musk, although perfectly fine, it's nonetheless there's still stage, and to the extent that instills of a commercialized, market-driven, inventive thing. When we got a space plane that could take off from an airport and go up to our space station for the transfer shuttles to the planets, then we'll have caught up with 2001: A Space Odyssey. So anyway, see you all, kids, everybody, and don't accept any wood. I know I never do.